All right, good morning, church. Welcome back to our series entitled Helpful Compassion, which is basically a study that is to equip us on how to love people well, how to love our neighbors well, how to love people well in this very challenging time, in this time of upheaval, and a rather unpleasant season for most. We want to love people well in ways that will actually help them, So today, we're going to talk about how to helpfully love people well who are struggling with intense loneliness and isolation. We're going to talk about how to help people well who are struggling with intense loneliness and isolation. Now, I know that loneliness is a long existing epidemic in our world today, especially with the emerging generations. I know that many of you personally have battled with loneliness long before lockdown started on the 23rd of March, 2020. My wife said to me this week, she said, Brian, everyone experiences loneliness because even the best of relationships are incomplete and imperfect. She said, we have a deep longing to be fully known, to be fully accepted, to be fully loved, and we can only get that from God. She said, no friendship, no marriage can fully meet this need because they will never know us fully, and the other person is sinful. And I was like, oh, ouch. Thanks, Kel. And she's like, okay. And then she corrected herself. She's like, actually, both people are sinful. She was looking at me a little bit too intently at that particular moment. But yeah, I mean, everyone has moments of loneliness. But for some people, it's extra intense. And for some people, even specifically during this season, it's extra intense. If you're battling loneliness in these days, I believe today's message is going to be extremely helpful for you. Extremely helpful for you. If you act on what we talk about today, I think you will see significant changes in your heart and in your life. I think this could be a life-changing message for you if you're battling with loneliness. If you aren't battling with loneliness very much, praise God. Praise God, that's so great, that's so amazing. But you are surrounded by people in your life, your neighbors, people that you know who are. And I want you to tuck these truths away because so many people are struggling with this. I want you to be equipped on how to speak to, how to help people move out of loneliness and into feeling more alive and more joyful, to break free from the darkness that loneliness can be. King David in the Bible, he writes about his feelings of loneliness. And he writes in Psalm 25 these words. He says, turn to me, speaking to God. God, turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely. For I am lonely and afflicted. That's what David's heart cry. Turn to me, God, and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. And then he goes on, he says, relieve the troubles of my heart and free me from my anguish. And he goes on in the next couple of verses. But all that to say and highlight is that if your starting point today is loneliness and a grief, an anguish-filled loneliness, that doesn't make you a bad Christian or anything. Even some of the greatest people in the Bible, godly people through ages past, have had these feelings of intense loneliness. And the good news for us today is that the Bible has great guidance for us. It has great guidance for us on how to move out of seasons of loneliness and into better days, even if our circumstances don't change at all. Okay, so before we dive in, I want to just say something that's really important, an important distinction to be made before we talk about the topic of loneliness. We got to understand this before we go any further. This is just crucial. There is a big difference between being alone and being lonely. We got to get that right from the beginning. There is a big difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone is a factual reality which can have a variety of emotional responses. Many people, introverts, are like, I'm alone. Yay! Extroverts, I'm alone. Boo. It can have a wide variety of emotional responses. Where loneliness, on the other hand, it's a state of mind. It's about how you feel. It's about how you feel. So you can feel lonely when you're alone, or you can feel lonely when you're with a bunch of people. It's about how you're feeling. When it comes to loneliness, we think of it as being connected with this sense of being alone, like I'm alone, therefore I can't do anything about these feelings of loneliness. But that's not true at all. I was alone for a month in Israel. I loved it. I had such a powerful and wonderful time with God that month. I didn't battle with loneliness at all, even though I didn't know anybody. And I had my room by myself. I sat on the bus by myself. I walked on paths by myself. I did a lot of just very much alone time. I didn't know anybody, and that was fine. For me, it was just me and Jesus, baby. And we had a good time. I loved it. Loneliness is a state of mind. It's how you feel. You can be surrounded by family, you can be surrounded by your best friends, and yet feel incredibly lonely. So today we're going to be focusing on how to step out of loneliness, the darkness of loneliness, even if you're stuck in aloneness. We're going to talk about stepping out of loneliness, even if you're stuck in aloneness, maybe connected to isolation and the isolation of these seasons. Just because you're alone doesn't mean you need to feel lonely. Okay. Now, this topic is really important to talk about for two reasons. Why is it so important to talk about? Because one, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to stay in a state of loneliness. It's dangerous to stay in a state of loneliness for long. People with prolonged, intense feelings of loneliness are highly prone to some dangerous things. They're highly prone to alcoholism and drug use. They're highly prone to cardiovascular diseases, decreased memory issues, learning issues, depression, suicide, higher levels of stress, poor decision-making, antisocial behavior, Alzheimer's disease progression, altered brain function. It's important that we move out of intense feelings of loneliness intentionally, because it's dangerous to stay in those places for very long. That's one why. Another why is it's important to talk about this because there's so much that you actually can do to break free. There's so much that you can do to break free from the grip of loneliness, even if your context doesn't change at all. There's so much you can do. Even if you're in an isolation season and you're totally alone, there's so much you can do to break free from every shadow of loneliness. You're not stuck at all. You can break free. In fact, I want you to truth type in the text there. I want you to truth type, I can be free. And you can even make it further. You can say, I can break free. I can break free. I can break free from loneliness. If that's particularly relevant to you. Loneliness, I can break free from loneliness. If you don't know how to spell loneliness, just look at the note that Lindy dropped up above, loneliness. I can break free from loneliness. That is a true statement that, especially if you ever have experience with it, and everybody does, you want to anchor that truth to your soul. I can break free from loneliness, and my situation doesn't have to change. In these days, more people than normal are sliding into loneliness because their life situations have changed. Change often triggers loneliness. Change often triggers loneliness. Maybe job changes, and maybe the reason for that is because you're used to being around certain people with your workplace, and that's now changed. Or maybe you found some identity and focus and fulfillment maybe in your job, but that's been changed now. Low self-esteem can trigger loneliness. Again, that's not about how many people you're around. There's low self-esteem can trigger that. Tendencies towards depression just generally can trigger loneliness. Reduced social contact, such as what we're living through right now, that can trigger loneliness. There's lots of reasons why more people than usual are struggling with loneliness these days, and that's why I'm super keen to talk about it right now. Let's start by looking at the Bible, though. Let's start by looking at the Bible, and I want to look at the story and really talk through the story of Elijah the prophet. So Elijah, right? Elijah the prophet in the Bible, we read mostly his story at near the end of the second bit of 1 Kings. It bleeds a little bit over into 2 Kings, but it's mostly in 1 Kings. And he's someone who spends a large amount of time alone. It looks like it, at least as we read through the Bible. At first, he seems just fine being alone. We're introduced to him in chapter 17 of 1 Kings. We're introduced to this guy who announces to King Ahab that there's going to be no dew or rain. No dew or rain during these years. And then God commands him to go hide in the Wadi Kerith. And then God's going to provide for him food via the ravens, bread from the ravens. And that's where Elijah goes. He goes and he hides himself during this drought. And he's by himself. He's by himself, and the ravens are bringing him food until the wadi dries up. Now, just for the record, that's just going to be months. Okay, that wadi is not a year-round water source. even in the best of times. It's always dry in the summer, so I don't know how long he's there, but probably a few months he's there, and the ravens are bringing him bread. But then the wadi dries up. And so he's there, he's alone, but you don't see any sense, you don't get any sense in the Bible that he's battling with loneliness. Okay, after the wadi dries up, he goes up north. He goes up to modern-day Lebanon, a town called Zarephath, and he stays there with a widow and her son up in that town for probably a couple years then. But finally the day comes for Ahab, and he has this incredible showdown, one of the great stories of the Bible, where there's an incredible showdown on Mount Carmel, and all the nation gathers together with the king there, and that's when the fire comes down and lights the sacrifice on the top of Mount Carmel, and the nation finally cries out, Yahweh, He is God. Yahweh, He is God, which is just one of those amazing moments in the Bible. Actually, Elijah's name means Yahweh, He is God. Elijah, Yah from Yahweh, Elijah, God. Yahweh is God. But they're not calling out Elijah. That I've looked into Hebrew. They're calling out, Yahweh, He is God. They're just proclaiming that. And then in that moment, Elijah goes to the top of the hill right then, and he prays for rain, and it starts raining, and then it starts raining. He runs to Jezreel, and then Ahab's wife Jezebel threatens him. And at this point, he seems to break, and he runs away. And this is what we read in 1 Kings chapter 19. Starting in verse 3, it says, Then Elijah became afraid, and immediately ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba, that belonged to Judah, that's way south, he left his servant there. But he went on a day's journey into the wilderness. So now he's alone. He left his servant there, but he went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down under a broom tree and prayed that he might die. Prayed that he might die. He said, I have had enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. Suddenly, an angel touched him. The angel told him, Get up and eat. Then he looked, and there at his head was a loaf of bread baked over hot stones and a jug of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord returned for a second time and touched him. He said, Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. Now, I know that I've kept reading, but I still wanted to keep reading, so you can just keep with me. And so he got up, ate, and drank, and then on the strength of that food, he walked 40 days. Okay, so then he runs for 40 days, right? He goes from 40 days after that moment all the way to Mount Sinai, where he meets with God, and God's like, What are you doing here, Elijah? Clearly, it seems Elijah is broken, though, and he's got severe symptoms connected to loneliness. And we read this then, skipping down to verse 13. When Elijah, so then God shows up, and there's fire, and then there's a soft whisper. And when Elijah heard the whisper, he wrapped his face in a mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, What are you doing here, Elijah? I have been very zealous for the Lord God of armies, he replied. But the Israelites have abandoned your covenant and torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they're looking for me to take my life. Then the Lord said to him, Go and return the way you came to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you're to anoint Hazael as king over Aram. You're to anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel-Melech, as a prophet in your place. Then Jehu will put to death whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death whoever escapes the sword of Jehu. But I will leave 7,000 in Israel, every knee that has not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. So Elijah left there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat, as he was plowing. And it goes on from there. Okay, so you can see now at Mount Horeb here, or Mount Sinai, that Elijah isn't just alone anymore, but he's broken by loneliness, a deep loneliness. You see that he's praying out of the darkness that he would die, that God would take his life, that I'm so at the end of the darkness of loneliness. There's clear depression here. There's clear exhaustion. He's just sleeping a lot. There's zero energy as he lays under that broom tree and he's like, just God, take my life. You also see that in his loneliness here, he's believing lies. He's believing lies. He says, I'm the only one left. And God's like, okay, well, there's 7,000. There's 7,000 that haven't bowed to Baal. He also knows in his mind that there is 100 prophets that are being saved by Obadiah, a guy named Obadiah. He knows that. He's ran across that less than 2 months before. And so he knows that there's those prophets there. And yet although the facts say there's 7,000, he's believing the lies that says, I'm the only one left. He feels like he's alone, even though the facts say otherwise. So how does God speak with him? What does God talk to him about? How does God help him when he was feeling this low in loneliness? Again, this is super instructive, guys. For if you know people who are lonely, this is how God helps. First of all, he gets him eating food. Secondly, he gives him drinking water, getting rehydrated. It's very basics. Thirdly, he lets him sleep, but he wakes him up. Not sleeping forever. There's sleep, there's rest, but there's also, waking up. And God just starts with the total basics. He has this angel basically ministering. Here's some food, here's some water, sleep. And then God corrects the lies that Elijah is believing. The lies about, I'm the only one left. No, there's 7,000, okay? And then he gives him purpose. God gives him purpose and focus and direction. Here's a job that I want you to do. I want you to focus on making a difference in this nation. I want you to think about that. Here's these 3 tasks instead of just being consumed with how low you are at the moment. God gives him a task and purpose. God has given you purpose. He's given you task as his people in this generation, his ambassadors for good and for his kingdom. But God gives him purpose and focus and direction. And then God tells him to pursue someone who will be with him and help him from then on, a guy named Elisha. He sends him to pursue someone. Now, this is so practical. It's so and maybe you're looking at this and you're like, whoa, when it comes to loneliness, like this is so, I'm not used to the Bible being so practical and relevant. It is entirely practical and relevant every day. We'll talk more about some of the practical aspects in a moment. But if you're feeling overwhelmed with loneliness, get the basics right. Eat healthy food. Drink healthy beverages. Get your sleeping right, both when you go to bed and when you wake up again. Confront lies that you might be believing with truth. Seek new purpose and direction so you're not so consumed with yourself. God has plenty for you. And seek out a friend. That's gold. That's gold straight from God himself. I guess I also want you to know that God hears the prayers of his lonely people. God hears the prayers of his lonely people. In fact, truth type for a moment. God hears my prayers. Maybe you're not feeling lonely, maybe you are, but God hears my prayers. God hears my prayers. Just type that in the chat. God hears the prayers of his lonely people. Prayers like what David prays in Psalm 25 and like Elijah in 1 Kings. God hears the prayers, but I also want you to see that God doesn't just zap Elijah with a happy heart. I hear you, Elijah, and now, boom, no more loneliness. He doesn't just zap him with a happy heart. Instead, he directs Elijah in what to do, which if he will do it, if he will do it, if he will follow the directions of God, then that will be his path out of the darkness of loneliness and back to his purpose. If he will do it. God gives him the way forward. He doesn't just zap him with a happy heart. Maybe you've been praying. And you've been praying for God to save you out of this loneliness, to see you in your loneliness. Well, I believe that God is answering that prayer of yours right now in this message. I believe he's answering that right now. You've been like, God, help me, I'm lonely. Okay, here you are, you're tuned in today, and this is not an accident. Maybe you hoped that God would just zap you and the loneliness would go away, but instead, as you listen to this, God is going to be giving you direction. He's going to be giving you great practical direction about how to break free, how to move forward from loneliness. I believe he's going to give you that direction, and he's giving you that direction right now like he did to Elijah all those years ago. So I encourage you, get ready to take notes. Get not just the notes that are going to come up on the screen, but ideas that match with you and your practical ideas. Write those down. Don't filter them to be like, oh, I don't have the internal fortitude right now to do that. Don't worry about that right now. Just write down everything that, as I say, that could be helpful, whether you do it or not. And again, write. Take notes. I think this is God maybe answering your prayer. Okay, feeling lonely. Feelings of loneliness are a sign that we need to make some practical changes. Feelings of loneliness are a sign that we need to make some practical changes. So we're going to go super practical right now. God gave Elijah some very practical things. Here's 7 things that I want you to address that are connected to very practical ways that if you're feeling stuck in loneliness. Number 1, stop. Stop feeding the lies and the messaging. Stop feeding the lies and the messaging. What I mean by stop feeding the lies like, I can't break free from loneliness because of my context, because I am alone. Okay, that's a lie. Or I'm too far lost in loneliness and I've been stuck in this for so long that I won't be able to break free. I've tried before and there's no hope for me. No hope for me? That's a lie. That's a lie. Stop feeding those kinds of lies. Or maybe like, no one likes me. That's a lie. That's a lie. I am unlovable. That's a lie. I will be alone forever. No, that's a lie. That's a lie. That's quite dramatic of you, but that's also a lie. Stop feeding the lies, and also stop feeding the messaging that might be dragging you down. Example, social media. It can either be helpful or dangerous when it comes to loneliness, but most people, it makes loneliness worse. It exacerbates the issues as they scroll through the social media incessantly, right? If you're battling with loneliness, I encourage you to just stop with the social media, or maybe limit yourself to 2 5-minute checks, but set the timer so that you stop. You've got to stop. I mean, I suggest just stopping altogether for a while. Just stop. If you insist on viewing social media at this time, then I encourage you to comment. Make lots of comments. Interact with, engage with. Have some sort of back and forth. Sometimes you might comment. It's engaging, but I encourage you really to stop if that's challenging for you. Also, stop feeding the loneliness by the TV shows that you're maybe watching or streaming. Most shows are about being together and communities or friends, even families that are together and they're having this amazing time and they work through everything together and everything ends up happy in the end. And that can cause an intensifying of your feelings of loneliness. If you're feeling lonely, this is not the time to binge watch Friends or binge watch anything like that. Maybe you can watch over and over again that Tom Hanks movie, Castaway, where he's like alone, like the whole movie with an island. He's got a ball with a face on it. It's like, Wilson, right? Something like that. Like maybe something like that. Or was it a Harrison Ford movie, right? Where he's Call of the Wild, where it's just him and his dog, or him and a dog or whatever. Don't want to give it away. But yeah, just be mindful of what you're watching and what it's feeding. If it's feeding that discontentment. Now, I'm not saying watching TV is awful or bad. It can be a nice escape, but in moderation. A couple shows maybe if you can handle it, but don't binge it. If you're struggling, maybe stop for a bit. Stop for a bit and see if that helps. Okay? Don't feed the lies and the messaging that you're getting bombarded with, that you're the only one that's all alone. Okay? Number 2, start feeding the truth and your connection to Jesus. As I mentioned earlier, in my time in Israel, I was alone, and it was powerful, and it was great, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I loved it. I had this special time in deepening my connection with God. In the old days, they had these desert monks. They were called the desert monks, and they were down kind of in Egypt area, and they would go out for the purpose of being isolated with God for years. And they would go live in caves and all that kind of stuff. They would spend their life out there in isolation because they knew that isolation can be super powerful. The enemy wants to take isolation and put us in dark places when it comes to loneliness, but God likes to use isolation to bring us to deep, wonderful, glorious places with Him. And it can be powerful. It can be powerful. The enemy wants to attack it, but the truth is we're never alone. We're never alone when we're walking with God. We're never alone. God is with us. In fact, why don't you truth type that for a second? Say, I am never alone. I am never alone. I'm never alone. And sometimes the shifting from loneliness to a life place of while being alone is just that perspective that God is with me. Okay, God, what do you want to teach me? What do you want to instruct me with in this moment of my life? You're not alone. I hope that if you're in isolation, you'll come to know the very wonderful and powerful friendship potential when it comes to you and Jesus. Okay, so start feeding the truth, number 2. 3, stabilize your life by getting the basic things right. And you saw this with Elijah very clearly. Get the eating right and healthy, right? Most people struggling with loneliness, their food situation goes wrong, bad, awful. Like they start eating either unhealthy food or not eating enough, and so the nutrition is all off. That just makes breaking out of loneliness and any sort of mental, emotional challenges just much more difficult. So God made sure he had food to eat. Secondly, get your drinking right. Stop with the alcohol if you're struggling. Get your sleeping right when you go to bed and when you wake up. The angel made sure he woke up. I think it might change your life if you just make a commitment to get up by 8 o'clock every day. As opposed to sleeping until 11, 12. It's just that emotional advantage of just being up early. Get the basic things right. Move. Get out of the house. Run, cycle, long walks. Get moving. Daily exercise is one of those most powerful ways we can push back against anxieties and dark feelings of loneliness. Fresh air, fresh perspective. I didn't highlight this, but once Elijah was fed and watered and slept, he went for a walk, a 40-day walk, but he went for a walk, and he goes, and yeah, all that sort of say, stabilize your life, like help you, getting the right things right. And God helps Elijah with that. Fourthly, spoil yourself appropriately and within budget, spoil yourself appropriately. Maybe shaking up your perspective a little bit. You can have a nice moment without people around. In fact, you can burn a nice candle, maybe one that you own or you steal from your friends, something like that. You can maybe pick some flowers or get some flowers, just kind of raise the bar a little bit, make a special meal for yourself. Maybe savor some tea that you love just because. Maybe take a nice bath, or if you have money, get yourself a wee treat of some sort, like chocolate. I don't know what other treats there are, but something like that. Just spoil yourself appropriately. Just like, okay, this is a good moment. I'm going to just raise the bar a little bit. Here's some flour, here's chocolate to myself. Okay, spoil yourself appropriately. Fifthly, step out. Step out towards relationships and step out towards mental resilience. Towards relationships and mental resilience. God sent Elijah to Elisha. God sent Elijah to Elisha. He didn't say, wait here and I'll send you a friend. No, instead he told Elijah to step out towards Elisha, to go get Elisha. Now, how did he do that? Well, how do we step out towards friendships? So many ways. Here's some simple ones. Join an online forum about that we're connected to people who have the same interests as yours. Join an online forum and comment on it. Join a Facebook group about topics that you're interested in and comment. You got to comment to engage. Join an online book club if you love reading. Maybe invite a few people to go rent Next Bikes, the city bikes, and go for a cycle into the city and back or something like that. Or maybe try one of those online phone multiplayer games. And I can only think of old ones because I'm not doing them right now, but there used to be one like Draw Something, and I'm sure that there was then Draw Something 2. There's probably like Draw Something 17 at this point, or 23. There was also like Words with Friends. In fact, actually, if you can just help me, those are all so outdated. If you can think of those like back and forth games over phones, just maybe put some suggestions in the chat. I'm not really dialed in at that moment, so you can help me there on the chat. Other ideas: write people notes, cards, drop them at their homes, like with paper and pens and stuff. That might help. Things that might help with mental resilience, though. If you're creative, and most of you have an aspect of creativity to you, start creating again. Drawing, painting, writing. Writing, is that one of your things? Cooking, DIY projects, if that's that you build something, poetry, write songs, things, creativity, things that can help with mental resilience. If you like read again. If you don't have an attention span right now to read much, then maybe try a poetry book, something short, or try a comics books. I used to like Calvin and Hobbes books. You could just open it wherever you wanted and just read for a moment and have a little chuckle and then laugh. 2 days ago, I read The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, and it took 15 minutes, and happy smiles, happy days. Just something simple. You don't have to read a novel if that's not your thing. Maybe audiobooks or podcasts for when you're going out and just doing your exercise, online class, pushing yourself to learn something new. Just this idea of moving out towards relationships and moving out towards things that can build your mental resilience by getting that focus off of your moment and on learning, on creating, on growing. That can have a big difference. That can make a big difference. That's number 5. Sixthly, again, super practical, shift your thinking and perspective towards your preferred future. Again, God pointed Elijah towards his future. Elijah, here's 3 things that I want you to do. He shifted his perspective from moaning in the cave by himself alone in his loneliness towards having some future perspective. For me, this week, on Monday, I set out my 3 priorities for the next 13 weeks, basically from now until the end of September. Very invigorating, very focusing, and it got me just leaning in towards this next season. I'm very excited about that, giving renewed focus and perspective. Oh, maybe what about you? What are 3 things that you can really be focusing on to lean forward in between now and end of September? Maybe somebody that you want to pursue, or maybe you want to do this kind thing for your neighbor or something like that. For me, I wanted to work on my health. Got a little bit out of control during this last season here. I also have 2 things connected to the church that I really want to focus on during this time. So I've got my 3 things, maybe coming up with 3 things over this next season between now and the end of September, or between now and Christmas, that you can just kind of lean in and that you'd find exciting and focusing. That's number 6. Shift your thinking and perspective towards your preferred future, like what God did for Elijah. 7thly, seek out others to serve who are suffering. Seek out others to serve who are suffering. And maybe they're suffering in isolation, or loneliness. Maybe they're grieving or have some health limitations or whatever. Getting your focus off yourself and to focusing on how you can help other people and serve someone else, that can be huge. If you know what loneliness feels like, then you've grown in your ability to have compassion on people. If you know what loneliness feels like, you've grown in your ability to have compassion with people. Maybe compassion on the old lady down the street, or the person with no family around, or anyone. Seek out to serve people. It's not only good for your heart, it's good for Jesus' kingdom. Okay, that's 7 things. Now I know that when you're feeling stuck, and when you're feeling stuck in the darkness of loneliness, like Elijah, that you can feel like you're just out of oomph, right? That you can just feel like out of drive to do anything. And maybe you heard me read that list and you're like, I can't do that. I'm so overwhelmed. I can't do anything positive and proactive. What I want you to see, though, in the Bible is that God doesn't make Elijah do those 3 things. In fact, Elijah doesn't do all 3 of those things. He actually only does 1 of those 3 things. God doesn't make Elijah do them, but he does point the way forward for Elijah. And points the way forward to how he can get unstuck from his loneliness. But Elijah has to be the one to step forward in obedience to God. If you're battling with this yourself, I can't urge you enough. Step forward. I can't make you do this. I can work with God to point the way forward, but step forward. I've given you some ideas, but you need to do the work to step forward. You're not stuck in your loneliness because of your circumstances. Even if you're alone, you don't need to be lonely. Step forward into your happy future. The challenge today is this. What practical changes do you need to make to break free from the grip of loneliness? Maybe write down or some practical things. Maybe circle, if you were taking lists, circle ones that would really help you. And I want you to try and step forward to step out of this era of your life. Now, if you know someone who's struggling with loneliness, maybe direct them to this message. Maybe direct them to this message or help them to make a plan and keep asking them about it, kind of hold them accountable. Like, you said you were going to exercise. Did you exercise today? You said you were going to eat better. Are you eating better today? You said you were going to, draw, sketch something. Did you do that? Not as a harasser, but as a friend. Maybe you want to message somebody right now and be like, hey, you need to watch this. It's going to be shown at 11 at the West End, 5:30 tonight as well. Dial in and make sure, maybe they can watch this and be helped. But finally, I think I need to say this. If you are in a very dangerous place in your loneliness right now, like a very dangerous place, it happens. We get there. And you need to get help. And if you do one thing right now, maybe you just need to call a hotline and get help. Maybe you need to contact us. What is it? care.southside@rehope.co.uk. But if you're in a dark place, I encourage you right now, before the end of this service, to email us or to get in touch with a hotline. We love you. We care for you. You are not alone. You're not alone. And there is a way out. We believe there's hope for you and your future. Let me pray for us. Spirit of the living God, I pray for those who are especially really felt for a long time burdened down by the darkness of loneliness. God, I pray for your breakthrough in their lives right now. I pray that you would use this time and this message to give them direction and hope and a future, to clarify some lies and to lead them, to highlight a great path forward for them. God, I pray that you would intervene, that you would lift the darkness, and that you would flood light into our lives. And I pray, God, for a moment of grace right now for all of us, that you would increase our capacity, that we could move forward from this place into the better place. Increase our soul capacity, our heart capacity to take steps forward now. Just grant us a window of grace to move forward. Everyone who's listening to this now and in the future. We love you in Jesus' name.